I think the word conductor is very significant because the idea of a current being actually passed from one sphere to another, from one element to another, is very important and very much part of the conductor's skill and the craft.
To know exactly what he's doing. From the point of view of the composer, first of all, and to be in complete command of the forces he has in front of him. He has to convince the men and women who are playing in the orchestra that if there are 6, 7, 8, or 80, 90, or 150, he knows more than all of them put together.
I think maybe conducting is the only evidence I've ever had that telepathy does exist. And I think the best conductors are really telepathetic.
And all of this while he keeps an absolutely firm hand, an autocratically firm hand, that what comes out is something that he's listening to in his head just before it happens. And with his ears, he's listening to whether it's actually happening the way he wants it to be. Now, that's only the beginning.
The power to convince orchestras and audiences that their view of the music was the right one made legends of the great conductors, even during their lifetimes.
Good. Just a little crescendo, little by little. Let the third still come through, though.
And a crucial part of that process was rehearsal.
Legatissimo! Legato! Must watch. It's so free. It's got to be like one person singing his heart out, and you're playing like an exercise.
I'll give you plenty of time to get over. Now, remember, shh, the great thing about this that you start it really softly, really, but with tremendous sort of undercurrents of great nervousness, soft, but something ominous and tremendous about it. And the B wants to be much shorter. Yeah, it's all short. It's all got. They're all got dashes of them. It's like You get one bar right, you get the lot right. There's a some long note somewhere. A place. It's the C that's too long. It's still like that. Now do try. It's the bases I think it's doing. But they both come off after the C. If you keep it up, we lift it quick after the C. And get that, it's not nervous enough, it's not soft enough, there's not enough portent about it. And it's a little too slow. Behind.
There's only one way to rehearse an orchestral piece, which is what I do.
What's that?
I take either a Mozart symphony or a Strauss tone poem. I play the whole thing through from beginning to end without a stop. The whole blessed thing. The orchestra makes a few mistakes, naturally. I play it through a second time. The orchestra makes no mistakes. I then just take a few little difficult parts. I pinpoint them. I emphasize them. I repeat those 3 or 4 times. I really perform.
What the devil's that? Magic wand, Billy. What? Magic wand, Billy. I thought it was an automatic baton, which relieved me of any responsibility and duty. Of course it's too high. What do you think I am? Samson? Or...
Sometimes.
He was inspired, and he was light-hearted, and he threw it off belying that kind of tief ernst of many of the Germanic traditions. You know, you have to have a long beard and be... Not at all. He threw it off as another one of life's delights.
House ballet music. Bum, bum, bum. One of the bar. Used to be anyway.
What does a young conductor do? Who will never profit by anybody else's experience, thanks to his unconquerable egotism and innate stupidity. Yes. He will take a first-class orchestra, and after playing 20 bars, he will stop, and he'll begin educating them. Fancy educating a body of people like the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. They already know the damn piece 10 lines better than he does. He goes on another 20 bars, stops, starts educating, teaching them. That's why he wants 6 rehearsals, and that's why I can do with 2.
It's all self-parody, and yet the moment that he takes the baton in his hand, and the moment that he's off, not what he says, what he does, you feel that he is able to turn a corner more elegantly and with more real sense of savouring the elegance and the sheer allure of the music, more than I can think of almost any other conductor.
Arthur Nikisch is considered by many to be the father of modern conducting. He was the first conductor to record a whole symphony, Beethoven's Fifth, but this silent film is the only visual record we have of him in action.
What you actually see on that film is a very disciplined and elegant, classical, if you like, conducting technique where everything is here. You can see how, for example, people said his eyes were mesmerizing because as a result of him conducting up there, the player is forced to look at his eyes. And every conductor virtually that one talks to will tell you that half of what you do is done with your eyes.
Any average conductor can imagine what a score would sound like, but then to infuse it with the extra thing, which is either Beethoven or Brahms or Mozart or Schubert or whatever, that requires a degree of imagination and a degree of projection into the mind of the composer.
Most remarkable musician, a wonderful conductor. Wonderful conductor, you can say that, even though there was no visual proof that he was the conducting.
There were two Strauses as a conductor, the one who was interested and the one who was not interested. And very often you had the feeling that he was just serving time or earning his fee and waiting for the card game that came after the performance. So sometimes it would be like this. He would be terribly bored, and in the finale of Fidelio, Beethoven, with his da-da-di-da-dim, da-da-di-da-dim, ba-da-di-da-dim, da-da-di-da-dim, da-da-di-da, looking at the watch.
Felix Weingartner succeeded Mahler at the Vienna Opera in 1908. Against the prevailing trend, he became known for his meticulous and respectful attitude towards the printed score. many ways, the German conductor Fritz Busch inherited Weingartner's mantle. Forced out of his homeland in 1933, he went on to become the first music director of Glyndebourne Opera.
Instrumentalists have their whole boyhood and their whole adolescence to study their instrument, on their instrument, to perfect themselves in its technique. But the poor conductor, he cannot do the same. His instrument is this dragon with 80 heads or 100 heads, and how should he practice on this instrument, which is the first time at his disposal when he begins his career? So he comes out as a naive and beginner, and this is a disadvantage which he can make up for only in years of practice.
I think, appealed to the musical soul of the orchestra more than most conductors. I think maybe they felt they were taking part in a sort of large-scale chamber music. And this is the secret, to come from within an orchestra, to lead them from inside, rather than dictate from outside.
One of the main questions is how to handle persons, how to handle men, how to influence his musicians by word or by his gesture or by his looks. And this is something here, his human qualities have very much to say in this question. If he is a man of warm heart and of sincerity, the musicians, even those who are far superior with regard to routine, will listen to him. If he is not a man who loves nature, if he does not know and love the meadows and the brook, he never could conduct Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony. And if he has not the passion, he's not able of ecstasy, he never could conduct Tristan and Isolde of Wagner. But you see how manifold are the demands made on him, and how versatile he has to be in order to fulfill these demands.
Now we start with brass. Horns, where are the horns? First horn, first 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. Trumpets, first trumpet. First trombone. Right. So let's begin. Cello and bass. We begin espressivo, and then diminuendo, and then again, and then again diminuendo. You understand? So always beginning the theme espressivo and go down. Piano, piano, too loud, too loud. Sing. Sing, sing.
Orchestral players like conductors who don't talk too much. They also very much seem to admire conductors who can do the talking while they're actually playing. It's the act of not playing and having to listen to people that they don't like. And a Walter, or indeed a Scholti, who's a master at that, actually does all their rehearsing while they're actually conducting, while the music's actually going on. So the player doesn't stop playing.
Go on. Last tone is piano. You know, forte, piano subito. I'm not quite happy still. When we begin, let the A live. You understand? Think it this way.
He cajoled the orchestra into following me. No, sparks did not fly, and it was gentle, but it was insistent, and it would not stop until he had his way.
Give me letter A. Sing.
There was a gentleness, an apparent gentleness to Bruno Walter, because he was one of the most iron-willed and stubborn of people. But he had a certain courtliness about him.
Now I tell you something. All these figures in first and second violin is espressivo. Why? Because you have the end at the end a diminuendo. Otherwise you cannot make a diminuendo. You understand? You are always with espressivo, and at the end it's a diminuendo. I begin from the very beginning once more, just to get acquainted with each other. Begin singing. Yes. Yes. Each time. Sing. Diminuendo, gentlemen. Too loud, oboe. Yes. Sing out. Now, you see? Crescendo, molto.
Walter is a very good conductor, but he is an absolutely other character than I am. You see, it's difficult to speak about this, but you see, he is very conciliating and very elegant and very mild, and I am not.
And he's very romantic.
Very romantic. I am not at all. And he is what we call, but you not misunderstand, he is a moralist. I'm an immoralist. Absolutely.
The technical side of directing a large orchestra was left to the orchestra themselves. We had to become virtually a large chamber group and listen even more attentively to our colleagues in the other sections of the orchestra, because we had no help in precision from Klemperer.
He was a curious introvert character, very basic, very much knowing what he wanted, and yet his way of conveying it was had no how shall I say, didn't have technique or method or manner. It was he stood there with music coming out of him with great authority, and yet I don't remember him really talking to the orchestra. I don't remember his even doing a great deal, but he got his way and the orchestra played, especially in his later years, when he just really stood there, but stood there with authority and with conviction. That was a kind of magician.
Klemperer's tempi always had this at the back of his mind, that the music must be articulated cleanly and must have time to breathe. He had no tempo. There was no Klemperer tempo. The tempo was decided by the circumstances.
Klemperer was not concerned with precision. If it happened, he liked it and accepted it. With Furtwängler, precision in orchestral player was not his primary aim. I often had the feeling that Furtwängler actually didn't want this, and his rather, we used to call it puppet on a string, physical way of conducting was in a way rather deliberate. He wanted to avoid the slick modern American whip-crack powerhouse chords. He wanted more weight, more almost heaviness.
wasn't a machine, but in his flexibility he was very precise. And it takes greater precision to be precise about a fluid shape than it does about a solid shape. A solid shape you can specify. You can give it the angles you decide and the planes and the area, and you can be quite specific about that. It can be also very complicated, very complex. But to be precise about a living, moving fluid, that is, I think, really, that requires great skill.
Und die nicht langsamer. Diese 16 sofort und gutes Fassen. Crescendo ist in der Mitte des Taktes. Nicht schon am Anfang. Sowohl bei Ihnen als auch war es viel zu früh. Nur ganz, und nicht so übertrieben stark. Das ist so ganz das Melancholische. Machen wir es nochmal. Bitte recht legato. Nicht ja, dann ist wieder einer hängen.
Ich möchte eine Begebenheit erzählen. Da saß ich an meinen Pauken oben und ich hatte ja auch Komposition und Dirigenten studiert und legte immer eine Partitur auf meine Pauken, wenn ich nichts zu tun hatte. Eine Pauke hat ja manchmal viele Pausen. Und dann verfolgte ich die Komposition und bei der Probe tut man das Notwendige und man weiß, wie es bei der Probe klingt. Und ich schaute dort hinein und merkte plötzlich, es entsteht ein ganz neuer Klang. Also ein faszinierender Klang. Und ich dachte, was ist passiert? Und schaute zum Dirigenten, aber da war nichts Besonderes zu sehen. Ich schaute zu den Kollegen und die schauten zum Eingang. Und im Eingang stand Furtwängler. Der kam dort rein. Und allein seine Persönlichkeit, sein Auftreten, ohne etwas zu zeigen, ohne etwas zu tun, brachte diesen unendlich schönen Klang hervor. Also wer selbst den Klang so stark in sich trägt, dass er den Klang bei allen so herausfordert. Ich meine, das ist natürlich das, wie es schöner eigentlich nicht sein kann, nicht für ein Orchester, wenn man merkt, also dieser Mensch, der zeigt sich ganz offen und ja, und man ist eingeladen, es ihm gleich zu tun. Und dann musiziert man in dieser Weise.
103 musicians of the unsurpassed Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by the renowned Dr. Furtwängler, rehearsed Brahms's Fourth Symphony for their concert that evening in the Empress Hall, Earl's Court. The Berlin Philharmonic was invited to Britain by the Dean of Oriel College, Oxford, leader of the movement called Christian Action, as a gesture of reconciliation.
those days, more cultivated days, the New York Philharmonic was broadcast every Sunday throughout the nation, Toscanini conducting. There was no television, of course, in those days. And that was the great cultural event that fashioned the musical audiences of that time in the whole of the United States. And I remember listening to a broadcast of his with my father somewhere on tour in Colorado. We were in a car, and that unmistakable Toscanini stamp was on it. It had naturally pace, precision, incision. Everything was as sharply defined as you could possibly imagine. That was his greatness.
Toscanini was very much the disciplinarian, and I would say instead of being an autocrat, he was more a dictator with the orchestra. But they had immense respect for him, and immense love and affection, and it was a marvelous orchestra. So that between his autocratic or dictatorial ways and their love and affection for him, they got along fairly well. Only occasionally would there be one of those famous temperamental outbursts on his part.
Piano piano, stringendo. Contrabbassi, follow me. E corte note. Short note, short note. So, sembrano dei carri. Non sono mica strumenti. Oh, Madonna Santissima. Short note.
He had no interest in the technical side of recording, and Toscanini always just expected to hear on the finished product what he heard standing in front of the orchestra. And of course, in those early days, that wasn't always possible because of the limitations of his huge dynamic range. We were recording once one of the Respighi tone poems, and when he came up to listen to it, he felt the climaxes weren't loud enough. And the engineer said, but Maestro, if we make it any louder, it will break the equipment. And he said, break the equipment then.
Every great artist does thousands of things for which we have no method of writing on paper. We don't know how to do that. And we have to, through imagination, through feeling, through I don't know what, some instinctive quality that some artists have, we have to try to understand and reproduce and give to the listening public what we consider was in the mind and soul of the composer.
Leopold Stokowski was born in London, but managed to acquire an accent of indeterminate origin. It was all part of a natural showmanship which from time to time obscured the full extent of his talent. In fact, he was an expert conductor who could draw from any orchestra what became known as the Stokowski sound. That rich, lush quality developed during his 20 years with the Philadelphia Orchestra.
The flute has a solo. Instead of my conducting him, I follow him. I notice how he likes to phrase. Same with the oboe, or the clarinet, or the horn, or whatever is a solo instrument. Now, with the strings, I like the feeling of the violin that sounds like a voice singing, to give it what we call cantabile in music. This singing quality is a beautiful thing. You have to give them a little freedom and breadth to do that, and I admit I do that.
A lot of people still today look upon him as a charlatan, but he was a musician right through and through, and he knew exactly how to present himself to the world. But when it came to conducting, I still think there was no one before him or since who knew how to make an orchestra sound. You might not have agreed with the sound. It was terribly lush and sometimes perverse, but it certainly ravished your ear.
It wasn't charlatanry. He really did believe in it. He believed that the huge sort of Victorian organ sounds that he got in the Bach toccata and fugue were justified. And when you listen to it, it's a terribly exciting sound.
Some conductors had techniques that were at best difficult to determine. Koussevitzky, for example, was a marvelous conductor, but completely by the power of his personality. And he did it in rehearsal, searching for ways to make the orchestra reach for something that he could not explain in words. And he screamed and yelled and cajoled in English, Russian, and French until he got what he wanted. Herbert Werner was one of the most brilliant stick technicians that I ever heard or saw. He had the orchestra at the tip of his baton, and he used a baton about this long, and he would just gently, and then he would do the tiniest of motions, and then look at them and say, "Why don't you follow me?" There are many stories about him, but they're legion. But the man was an absolute master of every single moment when he was on that podium. He knew it all. It was all in his head, his ears, and his eyes looked. Now, any good conductor will tell you, as Brymer did very often, they use their eyes most intelligently. It's the eye as much as the hand. They're looking at the orchestra, they're looking at the men, seeing, are they watching the conductor, are they looking at the score? But at some moment, simply by looking, they make the musician look at them, and there's an eye contact. The musician knows that the conductor knows what's going on in his mind at that moment.
Was not a man of sentiment or sentimentality. The same time he once recorded The Dance of the Seven Veils, and Mrs. Reiner, who was always present, said to me, "Don't you think he should schmaltz it up more?" And I said, "Well, you know, depends." I said, "I'm sure he won't." So when he came down here to playback, I was the one elected to brave the lion, and I said, "Dr. Reiner, it's a marvelous thing. There's no editing involved. Would you want to do it once more just to make it a little more sensuous, a little more schmaltzy?" And he said, "No." And that was the end of that.
minimum of body motion, he got the most out of any orchestra. And if you talk to other musicians who played under Fritz Reiner, there was nobody who knew the score better than Fritz Reiner. He was flawless. All he had to do was just look at you.
I set out to build an orchestra which would combine the best qualities of the fine European orchestras, pre-war period, even pre-First World War period, with the finest qualities of the American orchestras in their best period. That is the impeccable intonation, the impeccable virtuosity, the brilliance, the smoothness of execution, which very often in America was an end in itself.
It's the Bell Telephone Hour.
You play it now absolutely 100% rhythmically, this ta-tam, pa-pam, pa-pa-dam, but at the same time it has a little bit of pedantry about it. Couldn't we just make pa-pam, pa-pam, pa-pa, not too much space, not demonstrating how rhythmically we are playing it, just naturally, pa-pam, with a little more resilience to it. Before C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Third and fourth horn with it, pa-pa-pam, coming in good time and preparing a good crescendo. Shadows, long quad, long, almost a little too long quad.
I didn't sack many. I was, you see, the Cleveland Orchestra was financially always very well endowed, so I could proceed with due regard to certain human considerations and could do it in a milder way. But there were, of course, moments of heartbreak and moments of unpleasantness. But then, of course, you arrive very soon at the point, and this point is now very much at discussion. What is the purpose of a symphony orchestra for which so many people give, without compensation, their time, I'm now talking about the board, and collect money. That's the way American orchestras are being run, as you know. There's no state or public money, just private money. What is the purpose? Is it the purpose of the symphony orchestra to make it possible to have the best of music, or is it the purpose of such an orchestra to give their members the easiest and unchallengeably permanent job?
Oboe, please don't shortchange me in your very last note. No vanishing acts, please. F. Don't sustain a lump of sound, sustain a dotted half note with the pulse of each quarter inside it. Then you know when to go on. Once more, F. To be a little bit more sarcastic.
George Szell knew how the oboe breathed, so he would breathe with it. He knew how to give the oboe time to prepare the breath. He was a pianist and played wonderfully, but he bowed his scores for the string players. Some of them were funny at the time, but they worked musically. He knew how to create the effect that he wanted with an up bow or a separate figure or a legato, whatever the case may be. He knew exactly what he wanted to hear, the kind of articulation or the kind of singing sound that he wanted given that composition, that place. And this is something that the orchestra musicians want to know.
Horns just a shade late, some of the horns. You must be prepared way ahead of time. I can't do better than to repeat this truism I think I said yesterday. Rests aren't there to rest, but to be braced for the next entry, to prepare and to be ready for it and to listen what's going on around you and to bring your next entry in so it makes sense and connects. To be ready with your breath, with your embouchure, everything, and with your general attitude. The resolution, alive. Suspense. No crescendo. Suspense. Quick crescendo yet. One. Più. Più. piano. 2, then 1 forte and 2 fortes.
Und das konnte die 100. Aufführung sein. Die war noch genauso faszinierend wie die erste. Denn er brauchte sich, er sah sich so als Mittelpunkt und musste da entsprechend sich engagieren für sich selber, für seine Karriere.
I confidently feel that for the greater part of public who has never been in a concert hall, they will get the idea. We've made some very queer experiences. First of all, in this time I was with my orchestra in Berlin in Japan. And last time we have been there was just one concert televised for people who were invited. This time every concert was televised. We have 18 concerts. And the estimate is that 25 million people watch these concerts. There is no getting around the fact this is the future and this is our times. And today it's maybe 25 millions. In 3 years, when we will do the thing from the concert, there will be 200 millions.
Karajan war der Erste, völlig anders. Er war nicht auf der Herstellerseite, sondern er war der fantastische Verkäufer. Nicht? Er verkaufte die Musik. Und er verkaufte sich, er verkaufte uns mit. Und das passt in unsere heutige Zeit. Nicht? Und deshalb, das hatten wir gespürt und deshalb wollten wir ihn auch haben. Nicht? Weil wir ganz deutlich wussten, wir haben jetzt damals unendlich viel Schönes kennengelernt. Auch Karajan wollte dieses Orchester haben, weil dieses Orchester den Klang Furtwänglers in sich trug. für uns war die erste Zeit nicht leicht, denn Furtwängler hatte uns flehentlich angeschaut und er hatte sich mit uns auseinandergesetzt. Und jetzt plötzlich wurden wir keines Blickes mehr gewürdigt. Nicht? Die Augen waren geschlossen und er stand dann so vorn und dabei nun diese glutvolle Musik dagegen setzen, nicht? Wenn man nicht angesprochen wird von dem Partner. Das war im Anfang sehr schwierig für uns. Später haben wir dann uns immer mehr aufeinander eingestellt. Karajan sich auf das Orchester und das Orchester auf ihn, sodass wir dann damit umgehen konnten.
No, that's not right. It's not enough. You must, I mean, please, almost no bow. I mean, just like breathing on the string, but an enormous left hand. I know it goes against your grain as a solo violinist to do that, but you must, to get this sonority of voices. It's got to be singing. It can't be just string playing.
There was a natural eruption of creativity in Lenny that spilled over into his interpretive and performing habits. He was not to everybody's taste always, and he did tend to over-gild the lily once in a while, but so wonderfully and so gloriously. He gave of himself, and he created this wonderful palace of sound and ideas and emotion, sheer emotion.
There was somebody who had a more of the physical energy of rhythm in his body, in his little finger, than any conductor I've ever seen before or since. I mean, it was not just that he danced on the platform in a way that was unpalatable to many people, but didn't worry me, because it seemed to me that he was not trying to say, look at me, I'm having a wonderful time, but he just couldn't prevent it. It was as natural to him as swimming. And he had this extraordinary ability to make the players go along with that rhythmical current.
If we ask what is it that music communicates to us, it's like all great art, that every human being is alone in a sense that he's locked up in the isolation of his own mind. And then you hear a piece of music and you feel he too has been through this. And it's almost as if the musician is saying to you, you're not alone, I am with you.
What do you think is the essence of a great conductor?
That really is something like the Gretchenfrage, isn't it? Sort of, do you believe in God? Well, I don't believe in God as a conductor. For me, he should be communicating to his artists of the thing he's at the time doing, his will without even saying anything. And there was one who did that, and that was Furtwängler. I have to right away mention him because he is now, in retrospect for me, the great conductor of my life.
What was so special about him? What made him stick out from all the other conductors you have been singing with?
Communication, conviction, fantasy, humanity. If I remember, for instance, the famous recitative to the Elvira aria in Don Giovanni, and he made me do a version which I don't think I could never do later with another conductor quite so convincingly, which was utterly dramatically right, theatrically right, and emotionally right. And emotion, I think, perhaps is the most important thing for a conductor, to communicate emotion without getting into the kitsch or into the overflow of emotion. You still have to know the limits or feel the limits. I don't think it was a question of knowing with Furtwängler, it was feeling the limits. He did at the time, while we were around singing with him, we thought he was beyond limits, but now, listening to all and sundry, he wasn't. He was in the limits, but filling them to the greatest degree with expression of all instruments, of all singers, and besides he was a wonderful human being. He had his shortcomings, as he didn't like one certain other conductor whom he couldn't speak other than Mr. Herr K. And I remember one occasion when he had supper with me, and it came to performances of Mr. K, and Furtwängler was trying to explain to me his idea of conducting Beethoven symphonies, and the Mr. K's idea of conducting Beethoven symphonies. And now, such a long time afterwards, I can see, and I can hear, and I can feel, and I can understand now what he meant. He was something very akin to another great artist whom I adore, which is Sviatoslav Richter. He was communicating with the composer, Furtwängler. And so is Sviatoslav Richter. He's not exhibiting himself, he wasn't. He was utterly unself-conscious about anything, but communicating with I would say straight into the eyes and ears of the composer, giving him his ideas. So that's what I think about Furtwängler and the essence of a great conductor.
What about Toscanini?
Well, I've never sung with him, but that is, I sang once to his finger sitting on his sofa in, what was it, the little isola in Palanza, I believe, near Palanza, in the Lago Maggiore, where we went past, my husband and I. And then he received us very graciously, and he was immediately starting to talk about the incredibly bad habits of the German conductors conducting Mozart, especially Zauberflöte. So then he started conducting the Pamina aria and said, you sing to my finger. So sing I did. We sat both on that sofa, and I sang, I don't know which tonality, much faster than we have ever heard it before. She said, it is utterly incredible. They regard it as a sad and lyrical piece, and it is a dramatic aria. And anyway, we went off there, sort of humbled, and I said, oh God, what would have been happening if he would hear some of nowadays performances? Now, he was with us, with my husband and me, very, very nice and very sweet. We went both down to invite him to conduct some concerts after the war with our orchestra, with the Philharmonia in London, and he came. he came and conducted two Brahms concerts. Oh, there were all kinds of things happening, but he interrupted the orchestra rehearsal only once. For no instrument change, for nothing, but he said to the then really our most marvelous oboist, he said, interrupted, come questo, molto bene, però in tempo. Na, yeah. Also, then my husband was very proud that he didn't want any other changes from his orchestra than just that little thing. Yes.
If I could bring back one of the great conductors of the past,
yeah,
and say, Frau Schwarzkopf, Frau Professor, here is a man and you can give one performance more with one of them. Who would you choose?
Now that's unfair, because there are some of them, and they're all dead, apart from Sawallisch, which I still regard as one of the greatest conductors in the old. He's not a star, and he never made a star of himself. He wants to make music, and that is what the singer feels. And this making music untrammeled and un-public relationed and everything is a wonderful sensation. You are as if in private and you are making music. Never mind about all the other hullabaloo. So I would give him the prize, I dare say, because everybody else had the great hullabaloo in public relations. Some made it, and some had it unwanted, like Szell, who got it anyway, you see. And Böhm didn't really want it, didn't care, but he had it, rightly so, you see. And some other people, and Furtwängler has it now, and rightly so.
Can you still in your mind see Furtwängler conducted?
Yes, yes.
What
yes.
did it look like?
Well, it was this seemingly gaunt figure, which it wasn't really. His head was very long, and so one thought he was very, very tall. He wasn't really. And what it looked like, when you looked at him, he was totally immersed in his expression in the music. Not in what was happening on stage, but in the music. You could see it in his eyes, in his whole what you call it, attitude, in the face. It was thinking the music all the time. More than any other conductor. I dare say. Yes. Well, I was so lucky to be able to sing to their contentment at the time, and I must say I'm most grateful for my destiny, having been conducted by so many great men, including Mr. Legge.
Greatness in a conductor is something that one recognizes when it is there. But I feel it defies analysis of how to become one. It certainly involves so transcending the mechanics of conducting an orchestra, the technical side of indicating tempo, whether strict or involving rubato, transcending these things to such an extent that one is only aware of an interpretation. This involves an elusive quality which I would only define as communication, of being able to communicate to perhaps 100 highly trained, highly competent musicians with, certainly in England, the minimum of talking and rehearsing, because we do not have time for that. Economics dictate this state of affairs. And a truly great conductor might not be recognized as such until after a performance, when we realize that something has happened. The performance has been an occasion in which we've forgotten details of rehearsal, tricky ensemble situations. A great conductor will transcend these problems on the way, totally subjugated to the end, which is surely interpreting, we hope, a great work of music. A great conductor will use a full-size symphony orchestra as a single instrument. He will use it and he will play it. With the greatest respect to the distinguished conductors before the public nowadays, I can't think of one who can do this to the extent of Toscanini. The two possibly greatest orchestral training conductors there ever were, Fritz Reiner and George Szell. They obtained a precision in orchestral playing which I personally don't believe has ever been approached outside the United States of America, and I'm as patriotic as any English musician can possibly be, and one has to admit this. The artists of the caliber of Serge Koussevitzky, Toscanini, Fritz Reiner and Szell had mastered the logistics of conducting an orchestra, I'm back to one of my first points, to the extent that this could almost be forgotten. They transcended the technical problems, leaving the way clear for a highly expert, efficient music, call it what you wish, orchestra to get straight to their interpretation. They'd removed the impediments. I feel that in the presence of a great conductor, there is a feeling of mutual trust. We trust, speaking as an orchestral player, at a concert, a great conductor. We trust him to the extent almost of us not having to be too careful about being together, that the mechanics and logistics will be right, because his stick technique in the actual technical art of conducting will be such that he will take charge of us. We can ignore that. We can put ourselves in his hands, and we know that if it's a little faster, a little more exciting, a little louder actually at the concert than it was at the rehearsal, that nothing technical will go wrong, because we recognise a great authority on the rostrum who can take care of us. Conversely, he will trust us to be technically competent to give that little extra physical, mental and spiritual that a great performance will demand. Sir Thomas Beecham, to me, was one of the two great pole stars amongst conductors, Toscanini being the other. Totally at opposite ends of the music spectrum, and both producing performances which to me in their own way have been totally incomparable since. Sir Thomas Beecham has been, perhaps rather unfairly described, as a great amateur. He was concerned with qualities which mean a great deal to me in music: lightness, charm, wit, sunshine. He never insisted, and I don't believe his conducting technique could produce the greatest precision, such as the orchestras of Cleveland, Chicago, Boston could ever produce. But to me, he went far beyond that into the realms of sunshine, and it was just such a privilege and a pleasure to work with him that I felt this is why I'd lost endless boyhood hours learning the violin. I was never greatly concerned with his own orchestra, the Royal Philharmonic, although I had the privilege of leading Philharmonia only once for Sir Thomas, but during my late student days and early professional days, I lost no chance of playing as an extra player, possibly at the back of the first or second fiddles in the Royal Philharmonic, in order just to watch this man at work. He had the qualities which certainly are not extant in the world nowadays. He'd come in on a rainy Monday morning with that wicked twinkle in his eye, with a very perhaps weary orchestra, and sunshine could fill the hall. You'd consult your watch, which you thought about 10 minutes later, and find that it was possibly 1:45. He could make time vanish during rehearsal. This sort of quality is undefinable, and it was there, but it's not anywhere now. Underneath, you know, Beecham was a very, very serious musician. Music just took life when he was there. His tempi for Mozart just had a feeling when one was playing with him. How can this be at any other tempo? It's just a total authority. There's a sense of rightness there, of a shaping, of breathing, of music being alive, of being rather unimportant that it's 1, 2, 3. The one might be slightly delayed. His gesture would delay a bow to the string contact just that tiny bit. He didn't have to say, I'm just going to make a writ at the end of that bar. You'd get a wicked glint and a lift of the arm. Your bow goes with it. No need to say anything. Klemperer, perhaps in retrospect, now he's not with us anymore, I realised what a very great man he was. At the time, my practical business in my job as leader of an orchestra, of interpreting the very vague flapping of those enormous hands in pieces even like the Stravinsky Symphony in 3 movements, I was so preoccupied with trying to transmit to my 100 colleagues some sort of direction for trombone and trumpet short chords, which from Klemperer's very vague gestures nothing could be defined. That coupled with the fact that his interpretations never have been personally my ideals. Instinctively, perhaps because my father was an engineer, a marine engineer, I like the Cleveland, Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia way of playing. Klemperer was never concerned with quality of sound. Never. He was concerned, sometimes overmuch, with balance and phrasing. Balance may be due to impediments of hearing later in his life, an accompaniment perhaps to let's say a wind instrument solo was sometimes over-subjugated, overdone, to my way of thinking. His tempi was slow. He gained immeasurably in works like the great romantic repertoire of Bruckner, the choral works, Beethoven, Mahler, because I played most of all of those with him. I admit in retrospect now that they were great. Not for me personally, not my personal taste, that doesn't come into it. My job was to interpret the way he wanted me to play to the best of my ability, my personal feelings right at the back of my mind. If I liked it, a bonus for me. I didn't happen to like it. Nevertheless, that didn't even come into it. But I did also have the problem in Klemperer's day, because he was the very opposite, let's say, of the Szell Reiner cleanness and crispness in his beat. The technical side of directing a large orchestra was left to the orchestra themselves. We had to become virtually a large chamber group and listen even more attentively to our colleagues in the other sections of the orchestra, because we had no help in precision from Klemperer. And to try and get some precision over an orchestra was my job, whether I liked it or not. Whether I managed with any degree of success, I don't know. I tried my best. I could quote some instances of great conductors totally moulding the characteristic sound of an orchestra to their own personality. To quite an extreme degree, I would quote Leopold Stokowski. The Philadelphia Orchestra, in its heyday, was unique inasmuch over an enormous period of years, over half a century, having only 2 conductors, Leopold Stokowski and Eugène Ormandy. The similarity between those 2 conductors was that they both seemed to be after the same character of orchestral sound. The modern, plush, Hollywood strings sound, I might put it like that. The Philadelphia Orchestra has been known rather disparagingly as the cholesterol orchestra, because everything is comfortable and fat and relaxed, and they have never played much spiky modern music. But the influences of those 2 men, whose, to my mind, interpretations and ideals of orchestral playing are astonishingly similar, moulded the Philadelphia sound. Stokowski and Ormandy have both conducted Philharmonia. I won't say we achieved ever the Philadelphia gloss, but the characteristics were there after an amazingly short time. On the other side of the question, when Toscanini visited the Philharmonia in the early 50s, and we did our Brahms cycle, the Philharmonia was a very fine orchestra then. Toscanini's NBC orchestra, incomparable in its makeup of quality of musicians, always favoured the lean, clean, precise, almost hard-driven sound, as you can imagine. We were a very fine orchestra then, but I wouldn't say we ever had the characteristic NBC leanness, cleanness, power. But at the first downbeat from Toscanini, rehearsing the Brahms Tragic Overture, there was something of that already in the Philharmonia sound, an example of a supreme authority. May not even have been recognised as such by the orchestra. He was playing us to make the sound he wanted. But then the whole relationship between a conductor and a symphony orchestra has slowly but very relentlessly changed over the years. I don't have any strong feelings as to whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just evolution. The days of the great autocrat conductors are no more. I personally regret this, but this is purely personal. I would say Stokowski is the father of the modern orchestral sound. The early records he made with the Philadelphia Orchestra are quite astonishingly ahead of their time in standard of playing and in the general atmosphere and bloom of the sound he got from the Philadelphia Orchestra. He really was the most senior conductor in the world to produce this sort of sound from an orchestra, and in this way he's very much underrated. Because he was this flamboyant personality, people really forget that the influence he had over modern orchestral playing. It was quite mesmerizing.
It's a great shame that Klemperer started his the new efflorescence of his career, that he came to so late, because there are the earlier aspects of him which one reads of his being pioneering during the Kroll days and in Berlin pre-war. And one thinks of him now as an elderly senior conductor who did Beethoven and the great classics, and was possibly a little hidebound, and of that generation which concentrated only on the music of the great of the great period of music. But there are, he was asked once, do you consider yourself a Beethoven specialist? And his reply was, I hope I am an employable conductor for all occasions. And there are works that he has conducted. There's music that he's conducted you don't normally associate with Klemperer, like the Midsummer Night's Dream incidental music, the whole of the incidental music. And at the end, when the chorus comes in for the finale, at the very end, you have the wonderful theme where the choir sings, sing and dance, to the accompaniment of the... And he makes that chorus sing and dance, sing and dance. The word dance, dances. And his Mendelssohn Italian Symphony races on at a fair old clip. Barbaroli's rehearsal of the Bruckner is very revealing, because it's a scherzo. It can be played dancing. In fact, most of the time it's played as a dancing, light-hearted movement, Viennese movement. But Barbaroli was getting something else in it, and I did not, when he started, believe that he could get the feeling that he wanted. He wanted to make it menacing, and throughout, accent of that first bit, and he was always, even after the after the tune came in, he was still beating the rhythm. You see, otherwise, usually, as soon as the theme comes, you say, ta-ti, it's a flowing lyrical theme. No, but Barbaroli was still conducting the rhythm, because he wanted that established. He said it should be menacing, and he got it. The first, when he began, it sounded the usual, as an accompaniment to a tune which is shortly going to appear. But he made it into a theme in its own, and a very important part of this particular moment. And when it stops, I said, I wish I could hear the whole of that movement, because it is it's a very powerful performance, quite different from the normal performance of that particular piece of music, very valid, and superbly realized by him. The Fourth Triangular Till was very enjoyable. It had all the characteristics of a fourth triangular performance. But when you compare that with the performance by Strauss himself, it seemed to be a totally different piece. He didn't move his stick a great deal. He didn't go through any gymnastics or anything, but I did not believe that until there was any music which would make my heart melt. But when Strauss came to da-dum, pum, 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 be-da-dum, the way he caresses, da-dum, ba-dum, it was magic, sheer magic. Beecham was one of the great stars of the recording world. And when I, in India, learnt my music, it was through the radio and gramophone records. The pre-war London Philharmonic Orchestra, formed by Beecham in 1932, and the records he made then are in some respects unequaled, because the precision of playing, the beauty of playing, because he had people like Reginald Kell as his principal clarinetist, and the precision of playing and the beauty of playing has been unequaled in Mozart. I think his Hafner, the recording of the Hafner on 78, which was transferred to LP and is now transferred to compact disc, you listen to it through the haze of the recording of the time, you still capture the absolute magic of this particular performance. And In this there are times when we are asked as recording producers and managers, why can't you make records of that quality? The answer to that is you can only record what is being produced in a studio or in a concert hall. We can't manufacture a great performance. We can record it as faithfully as we can, doing as little violence to the performance as possible. And this is something I experienced while we were singing Messiah under him. He had this extraordinary capacity to make the strands of the highly contrapuntal music of Handel sound transparent. You can make a Handel chorus sound very heavy and solid, but even Hallelujah chorus and the last two choruses, Worthy is the Lamb and the Amen chorus, sounded light and transparent. They danced.
Well, first of all, Leonard Bernstein. Lenny and I were close friends for, almost 40 years. We played together very early on when he was beginning his career. And it was 1943 that he had this sensational debut when he replaced Walter at the Philharmonic in a nationwide broadcast. And we met, it was I think 3 or 4 years later after that for the first time. We were playing, Prokofiev #1 in Rochester, of all places. It was the first time and the last time, I think, that I ever played the second movement of that work, the scherzo. And we received such a round of applause that we repeated it before we even went on to the last movement. Lenny had an electric quality. He was something very, very special. In the years afterwards, we played and recorded many things. We played sometimes together. He with the piano and I at the violin, played various benefits, sonatas and things. And I knew him very well. I saw him within 3 or 4 weeks of his sad and completely unnecessary passing. Lenny's greatest quality was that he believed deeply in everything that he said he felt. It's hard to do, but he really did believe it. He was a wonderful friend. And he had to go through varying careers as a conductor. Now the very mention of his name brings most of the musicians in the city to a stop and tears in the eyes and, oh, you remember, and hugs and everything else. They forget the times when he was excoriated by the same musicians at a certain point, but that's a Philharmonic habit at one time or another in this country. I suppose all orchestras have that same attitude. If they live too long with the same conductor, there comes a time when the emperor has no clothes on. But Lenny was special. There was a dynamism. He was a person. When he walked into the room, you knew it. And he walked on stage, you felt it. And there was nobody really in any part of theater, film, writing, composing, any area of these arts that he did not know, and people whose work he had not seen, heard, or read. Astonishingly large mind. He was an all-embracing character. Sir Thomas Beecham, one of the least acknowledged of the great conductors. He was wonderful. For all his fun-making and his outrageously rascally remarks, which he loved to do. He loved to put the knife in and rub it around a little bit. But he knew he was making fun. But when it came down to work, This man was a master. And I'll never forget him because he was very kind to a very young soloist whom he didn't know, who was foisted on him. And he couldn't have been a nicer friend to me. And he did certain things which were extraordinary. I found them wonderful. His care for the soloists, his attention to his orchestra members, his care for their welfare, and his utter enjoyment of making music. He shared one thing with Werner. Once they had mastered something and knew it well, they could get bored. They were looking for the next challenge. But there was always this wonderful relishing of the magic of music, you know, and that's really what you look for. Stokowski, that was something else. He was a wonderful, he was larger than life, you know, the accent, the gestures, the grandiloquence, but on him it looked right. You know, you have to have a certain personality. My manager for the greatest part of my life was a man named Szell. And Szell was one of the few persons who could speak of himself in the third person, and on him it looked good. Stokowski lived that way, acted that way, almost conducted that way. It was, and everything got larger and more gilt-edged and with a sheen to it. I remember one performance of Tchaikovsky Concerto on the Hollywood Bowl. And, no, I'm sorry, the Lalo Symphony Español. Yeah. And it was the last movement. We were in the rehearsal. It's normally goes ya ta 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 tam ta 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 tam ta ta ta, and he started ya ta 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 tam ta 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 tam. So I looked at him, looked at the orchestra. So I stopped him and I said, "Maestro, this is a very difficult movement for me. There are a lot of notes, and I have a problem getting to some of them. Do you think you could make it a little slow?" Oh, he says, "It's too fast." I said, "Just a little." He says, "Good." He went right back, you know, so I let him go till the entrance, and I went da-dum, 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 da, cutting it down to a quarter of its regular tempo. And he stopped and he says, "Oh, you still think it's too fast?" I said, "Just a little bit." We got to where we wanted eventually. Werner was a superb colleague. He had a sense of panache in conduct and in the quality of an orchestra, of making it play beyond its means sometimes, and to have it rise to a height of frenzy or ecstasy that it did not expect to get to when it began the performance of that work. And as he would use small motions, when he made one big motion, well, all hell broke loose. And it was incredible, the kind of excitement he could create from this to this. And if he wanted to have a really ringing sound, he would go like this to the trumpets or to the timpani or to the horns. He would literally sculpt the phrases for the strings. It was all there. He was not gentle with the musicians and was given to a certain amount of petulant vituperation at times when he chose. And there are so many stories about this habit of his of making small gestures. And a player, a double bass player, knowing this probably would happen at rehearsal, came prepared. And as he went like this, and he said, "Why didn't you come in?" The bass player reached down and he brought out a pair of binoculars and put it up like that. He lasted about 20 minutes. He was out of the orchestra. Now, the difference is that those days are no longer with us. You can't do that anymore. There's a new relationship between orchestra and conductor. You know, Szell, we often said, knew more about music than any one man had the right to know. He could sit down and at the piano play you any of the Beethoven, Brahms, Schubert, Mendelssohn, Mozart, string quartets, quintets, sextets, trios from memory, all the parts. The man was an extraordinary musician. He was also a difficult person. And if you let him, he would walk all over you. You had to fight back. And you had to know your own values, and you had to know what you were talking about. Then he would respect you, and you couldn't have had a better ally. He created, really was, I think, one of the really great musical instruments in this country, the Cleveland Orchestra, which to this day bears the stamp of his training of almost first-class chamber music quality to its work, and a certain prideful esprit de corps that's quite special. He was a musician's musician. He was meticulous in sculpting the precise arch of a concept from the beginning of the work to the end. And it did fall into place. He was sometimes, in his effort to keep a central pulse, he would ride roughshod over sometimes the needs of a soloist. Not the orchestra as an instrument, but with a soloist, he was sometimes a little less than generously gentle. But he always did it basically on musical grounds, and you had to fight for what you believe in. If you proved your point, he came along happily. He was delighted. So I learned to have enormous respect and not a little affection for him. And I think I could say the same for him as far as I'm concerned. Some conductors had techniques that were at best difficult to determine. Koussevitzky, for example, was a marvelous conductor, but completely by the power of his personality. And he did it in rehearsal, searching for ways to make the orchestra reach for something that he could not explain in words. And he screamed and yelled and cajoled in English, Russian, and French until he got what he wanted. I was playing a Prokofiev concerto one day with him, and he said to the orchestra at the end of the first concerto, which is all orchestra, the violin goes up and down, tootling away, literally accompanying the orchestra, which plays little darting phrases like shafts of light suddenly going on and off, or shooting stars going through the night, and a brilliant little light here and a little thrust there and a little parry there. And he stopped them and he said, "Gentlemen, at this point, this must sound absolutely fantastical." Now, in hard-nosed terms for a musician, this is neither loud nor soft, fast or slower. What's fantastic? But it was his orchestra, so the whole orchestra. Where he said, "Once more," he said to me, "Golubchik, little pigeon," called me. Turned around, started to conduct, and they were playing their heads off. This was in rehearsal. I was very moved. And suddenly this scream came out, "It is not fantastical!" I have no idea what he meant. I'm sure the musicians didn't, but I tell you, at the performance, it was fantastical. There has to be a sense of excitement, of wonderment within the conductor if he's going to pass that on in any way. to the people in the orchestra. And he has to have the authority that if they try to trip him up, they do, he has to catch them right away. And also he has to know enough to have a cadre of very loyal, key supporters in the band. That means the concertmaster, first oboe player, perhaps first cello, first viola, timpanist, a horn player. They are all very special people. And they tend to rally around them the other links in the orchestra. Something from his hand has to go to the musicians immediately around him, and from them radiate outwards to the others. He has to respect their knowledge, recognize their weaknesses, but always let them know who's boss. To be a conductor is not to relish the idea of a democratic society. Doesn't work. It's like trying to be a president in a country that's made up of nothing but presidents. I've watched conductors often during rehearsals spelling out what they wanted some of the musicians to do, and they taught me some things. On the other hand, I've often had to wait patiently while the conductor did not tell them until I sort of tugged at his sleeve and said, don't you think maybe? But that's not with the good ones. You don't have to with the good conductors. There was an occasion once in Australia when I was playing the Mendelssohn Concerto with a conductor who shall be nameless, but was something very special as far as ineptitude was concerned. He was astonishing. And we were playing, and I was playing the cadenza, and they were playing with the orchestra supposed to come in, no orchestra. So I stopped. And I swear to you, this is the truth. And I said, Maestro, right here, or at least when it is played in Vienna, this is where the orchestra comes in. He turns around and says, well, you're not in Vienna now, old boy.